But a fairy tale is nothing without characters, and this story has some good ones. Like I said before, this novel basically came about because Burnett discovered more characters than were in her original novella. Basically, the kids were referred to as a group, with only Ermengarde being referred to by name. Now, I said before that I like the relationships between Sarah and the other kids better in the movie, but looking at the characters by themselves, I actually like them better in the book. Both Beckys are written well, and I like that they made her an African American in the movie, adding a racial difference in addition to a class difference, but to be honest, this girl's acting is a little stilted. Not Ben from Freaky Friday stilted, but stilted enough so that you see an actor rather than a character. Lottie is also given more definition in the book, and is actually isolated as one of the 3 people that Sarah gets close to. But the girls in the movie are a lot more active. Most of them actually try to stay friends with Sarah even after what happens to her. Instead of just Ermengarde and Lottie visiting her in the attic, almost all of them do.
What's going on here?
Which, of course, ends in disaster. Even though they aren't defined quite as well individually, they show a lot more loyalty to Sarah than the girls in the book, who just kind of abandon and forget about her. Also, the development of Ermengarde is a little better in the movie. In the book, she never quite gets past that simple-mindedness that she was prone to, although she does become less timid. Whereas in the movie, we actually see her improving in her classwork as well. But what about the adults in the movie? Well, obviously Captain Crew is given more time to be developed in the movie, whereas the book just kind of kills him off and forgets about him. Also, his reason for leaving Sarah at Miss Mention's is explained a little bit more clearly in the movie. In general, he seems to be a better father, teaching Sarah everything she'll later need to cope with her situation, while the book father basically just spoils her. But Mr. Carrisford, or Mr. Randolph as he's known in the movie, is given a little bit more definition in the book. In fact, it's Mr. Carrisford's idea to provide Sarah with all of the things that magically appear in her room, whereas in the movie it seems to be entirely the doing of Ram Dass. In fact, we don't really see much of his character in the movie, just enough to know that he had a son who was in Captain Crew's regiment and the son died, thus leading to the mix-up. And this truly is an interesting character, as he feels personally responsible both for Captain Crew's death and the plight of his little girl, who he's trying desperately to find, not aware of the fact that she is living right next door. I also like Miss Amelia's growth a little better in the book. The movie gives us this side story of Miss Amelia falling in love with the milkman, which is kind of cute and funny, I guess, but it basically has Miss Amelia standing up to her overbearing sister by running away. And Miss Minchin never acknowledges the fact that her sister has left, so we don't even get the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. In the book, Miss Amelia actually stands up to her sister, telling her how horrible she is for treating Sarah the way she did, and being so vehement about it that it actually sends her into hysterics. And it's implied that Miss Minchin has a new respect for her sister afterward. That's a little more powerful than just running off with the milkman. In addition, the book just has a lot more characters to juggle, and it does so very well, developing all of them and making them all relatable and relevant. I like the movie characters too, of course. I just like the book characters a little bit more. But we're not quite done with characters yet. We've still got to look at those who wanted nothing more than to make Sarah's life miserable. Here's the antagonists. This story has 3 main antagonists. We'll start with the bully, Lavinia. She's pretty much the same in both versions, a stuck-up, snotty little brat who's jealous of Sarah because she becomes the favorite student. In a lot of ways, Lavinia kind of represents what Sarah could be like if she was a worse person. To that end, the movie shows this a little bit better, even giving Lavinia Sarah's room after Sarah's been moved out. The movie also adds vanity to Lavinia's character traits, showing her constantly brushing out her hair. Or having it brushed out for her, as the case may be. Really, the main problem with movie Lavinia is that she suddenly turns nice at the end, with no real explanation. But really, this isn't something that bothers me so much, as it's implied that a decent amount of time has passed between this scene and the previous one. And I do like that Lavinia kind of takes over Sarah's role as mother/older sister to these kids. And it certainly isn't as bad as what they did to Miss Minchin. Speaking of Miss Minchin, let's look at this overbearing headmistress. The Miss Minchin of the movie is strictly grounded in reality, in stark contrast to Sarah's imaginative nature, which makes Minchin hate Sarah more and more throughout the movie. This gives the character a little more dimension, as it's implied that something in her past has made her this way, and that Sarah is touching a nerve with her continued imaginings. But this character trait isn't really developed, and Miss Minchin eventually devolves into the stereotypical villain, growing evil beyond all reason. Movie Miss Minchin's vendetta against Sarah is so extreme that she actually lies to the police when she knows that her father is still alive, just for the sake of having this 11-year-old girl arrested. The book Miss Minchin is a little more consistent. She held a grudge against Sarah too, but it's because she knew that Sarah was smarter than she was. And she only exploited this grudge when it was convenient and beneficial for her to do so. When Sarah appeared to be rich, Miss Minchin treated her as her favorite student, only to turn on her when she became poor. And when evidence suggested that Sarah might have a rich relative somewhere providing for her, Miss Minchin came more kindly disposed toward her again. She was a much smarter villain in that way, and her motivation was always clear: do what is best for herself and for her school. At least monetarily. But the true antagonist of this story is not Lavinia, and it's not Miss Minchin. In fact, it's not even a person.
I'm sorry, what now?
Oh, Hatter, you simpleton. Clearly you are unfamiliar with the 4 different types of conflict that can exist in stories such as these. You're thinking in terms of man versus man, or girl versus woman, as the case may be, but an antagonist does not necessarily have to be a person. There's also man versus himself, man versus nature, and man versus fate. The last is what we are dealing with here, and while Miss Minchin might be the driving force behind it, it is the situation that Sarah is truly fighting against. At least in the book. The movie does put more focus on the human antagonist as opposed to the situation. Miss Minchin turns into the stereotypical villain, the kids fight against her in various ways, and she gets her comic comeuppance in the end. The book focused more on Sarah's situation. The second act of the story, where Sarah hits her lowest point, is really developed and portrayed well in the book. And that's mainly because she doesn't immediately just get better. In the movie there's one scene that shows that Sarah has lost her ability to imagine, and then it all kind of comes back at once. The book has her going back and forth, sometimes having good days and sometimes having bad days, but gradually getting better while still having a definite turning point, which is more how a real person would handle it. We also get more of a sense of Sarah's hunger and loneliness in the book. Sarah is basically fighting against the world, which makes her victory that much more meaningful.
I think you might be stretching the antagonist category just a little bit.
Alright, maybe. But even if we were going strictly by Miss Minchin's character, I'd still fall on the book side. The book Sarah just has more to fight against than the movie Sarah does, which by definition means that the book has the better antagonists.